Alright, I'm going to run that way for 2,300 miles, ending up at Istanbul in about 3 months, hopefully. Aradhna on the bike. This is me. The Rhine is here. That's Germany. This is France. What can you do? You've got to run. You can't just have a day off. Absolutely freezing! This is us legging it to a concert due to transport issues at a palace. We are waiting for the pickup people that said they would be here 4 hours ago.
Right. You lovely.
The workshop will not be open till Monday, but we're in the middle of nowhere. He's like, I can move, I've got legs.
It's a she, it's not a he.
It's a she.
It's
Of
got,
course.
it's got udder. Full of milk.
We're doing this to check the depth of a puddle before we do something like rash, like drive Roxy into it. So we're using Aradhna as a measure. She's enjoying it thoroughly, aren't you, Aradhna?
I can't believe you're making me do this.
This is the weather we currently have, which is thunder, lightning and hail.
Hello and welcome to this special virtual launch event of Running the Orient, written by Gavin Boyter and published by Great Northern Books. I'm really sorry that we can't be doing this in person over a glass of wine, so I hope you've all sort of charged your glasses in advance and you have them by your side and can enjoy them as we talk together. I'm delighted to be talking to Gavin and his co-adventurer Aradhna about their very special and extraordinary journey across Europe. I'm going to introduce Gavin and Aradhna just in a moment, but just a word about format so you're all prepared about what we're going to do. There'll be readings from the book. We'll be having a sort of in conversation, and towards the end of the event we'll open up to an audience Q&A, so please don't hold back with your questions and do kind of write any thoughts and comments you have as we go along, and we'll get to them at the end of the event. I really look forward to seeing what questions you come up with. So by way of introduction, Gavin is a writer and filmmaker. as well as Downhill From Here, the book depicting his 2015 John O'Groats to Land's End run. He has also completed a contemporary crime thriller, Elena in Exile. His love of running began in his early 30s when he completed his first race, the London Marathon, in just over 3 hours, which is extremely impressive for this non-runner. Since that point, he discovered ultra running, completing distances of over 100 miles in under 24 hours. He realized that his personal achievements came from enduring long distances in rough terrains and tougher challenge, and set himself longer and tougher challenges in running the Orient, which we're going to hear more about. Kind of this story really kind of combines his interest in travel, exploration, and writing. Aradhna is a producer and consultant working in film, events, and the arts, helping organizations develop ambitious, digital, diverse projects. And she believes wholeheartedly in the power of film and storytelling to influence a fair and equal society. She's produced numerous short films with support from Film London and the National Film and Television School, and is a guest lecturer at Goldsmiths, University of London. Previously, she ran the BBC Short Film Festival and is a committee member of the Royal Television Society, London. A caveat, I'm friends with Aradhna, so that's, I'm really delighted that she asked me to chair this event. And for those of you who probably haven't come across me before, my name is Hannah Trevarthan. I'm Events and Partnerships Manager at English Pen. We're an organisation that believes that literature knows no frontiers, so it's really delightful for me to be chairing an event which is about travelling across frontiers and countries and kind of the interchange of ideas. So thank you very much again to Aradhna and Gavin for asking me to host this evening. As a quick introduction to the project, Gavin's now going to do a short reading from the beginning of the book, so you can all get a little flavour of what we're going to be talking about. Over to you, Gavin.
Hello, everyone. So this is from the very first chapter, The Drowned Forest. T-3 days. Now that it's finally happening, it's beginning to dawn upon us just what we've let ourselves in for. I'll be running through 8 European countries, all but one of which, France, I've never visited before. I speak very little French and no other languages apart from English. Aradhna fares a little better in Latinate languages, but is far from fluent. We haven't taken a holiday together that lasted more than a few days, and we've just committed to over 5 months of adventure, whilst living in a metal box just 3 cubic meters in volume. Aradhna has to secure a safe place to sleep, enough water to drink, electricity when required, diesel for our engine, food, including many thousands of calories for me daily, a way of washing our clothes as well as looking after my needs, whilst navigating, updating social media, and somehow keeping her regular work ticking over too. I've committed to run over 3,000 kilometers, crossing 7 international border checkpoints, over 180 rivers, and 16,500 meters of ascent through forest, mountains, plains, and major cities. I have no idea if I can run my aimed for 40 to 50 kilometers a day for around 100 days. We have no plans for dealing with injuries other than throwing ourselves at the mercy of local healthcare facilities. We both have EHIC cards and travel insurance at the ready. Friends may intermittently visit us, but we'll be largely on our own, relying entirely upon one another. This will necessitate a huge investment of trust in one another and will require patience, forbearance, and presumably the ability to count to 10 several times a day. It gradually hits home. We might be in Paris, one of Europe's most romantic and exciting cities, but this is no holiday. This is base camp. With all the drama of buying, crating, and testing Roxy, I have almost completely forgotten to train. Well, it's not exactly true, although it feels that way as I huff my way around the Bois de Vincennes Park, along with seemingly dozens of other runners on the afternoon of the 10th of March 2018, the eve of day 1 of our adventure. I certainly don't feel like an endurance athlete, as I was once hilariously described. My training has consisted of running about 35 to 40 miles, runs over 15 miles long, plus entering a few ultra races and trail marathons. I ran the Cotswolds 24-hour race for the first time, disappointingly managing only 96 miles, where I'd managed over 100 previously. The Dark Star River Marathon, actually 28 miles long, and the Beachy Head Marathon, very hilly. I performed well at these events and felt reasonably fit, but I can't say I followed a focused and detailed training regime. From running the length of Britain, I know that I'll get leaner and fitter as the weeks wear on, and I just hope the first few days won't exhaust or cripple me. On the previous challenge, I had aimed for an unrealistic 40 miles and managed roughly a marathon a day. This time, my target will be approximately 30 miles per day, 48 kilometers. I know I'll probably fall short of that, given some of the terrain I'll face, but I always think it's good to aim high. There you are.
Thank you so much, Gavin. It's a great introduction to the book and kind of some of the challenges kind of you anticipated. I want to start at the beginning actually and actually ask Aradhna a question first, because this was her idea, the kind of genesis of Running the Orient came from Aradhna, and I'd love you to kind of share with us all how that came about.
Yeah, it seems a bit mad now. So Gavin's previous book, Downhill from Here, had just come out, and it was doing the rounds of, book launches and interviews, and we were constantly talking about what next. So Gavin, as usual, was overbrimming with ideas, and he goes, "Oh, Aradhna, would you maybe like to come to the Appalachian Trail with me?" And I was just thinking, no, actually not really, thanks. And but I mean, I really did get swept away with the whole thing, and just, the idea of adventure, I just thought how fun. And I chatted to Gavin's dad, Ian, who supported Gavin the last time round, and he's got a few stories, but overall just that it was a really incredible experience. I thought, yeah, let's try it. And so I thought Europe was the sweet spot, just practically, affordably, and also I'm much more inclined to adventure across Europe than in the wilderness and the Appalachian Trail. We were at a book launch of one of Gavin's all-time heroes, Dean Carnathers, who was launching his latest book, and Gavin was at the end of a really long queue waiting to sign it, and it was something that Dean said in his talk about, he was just coming up with all of these fantastic ideas, and really ambitious, he said something about running a marathon in every country in the world. I was like, oh, that's cool. And when Gavin first had the idea for Down from Here, he said to me, "Oh, I wanted to run a really long trail in the UK." Well, the longest one is the whole of it, so I'll do that. And I thought, well, we're looking at really long trails in Europe. Is it mad to run all of it? Yes, clearly. And then I just thought of the Orient Express, and I got carried away because I'd love to go on the Orient Express. And I looked it up, and let me tell you, Paris, Strasbourg, Munich, Vienna, Budapest, Bucharest, Istanbul. I mean, I was sold. And so I just ran over to Gavin in the queue, and literally by the time we got to the front of the queue and Gavin got to meet Dean at last, we had a plan.
Wow. Gavin, how did you respond to this idea? Kind of what were your initial thoughts when Aradhna ran up to you with this kind of idea to run the kind of route of the Orient Express?
I kind of thought, Europe's quite big, isn't it? And that's like 8 countries, and yeah. And I don't know anything. I'd only been, as I said in my introduction, I'd only been to France. I hadn't even been as far as Germany. So it was all going to be completely new, because when I ran from John O'Groats to Land's End, I know Britain, not all of it obviously, but there were so many other aspects of unfamiliarity and also I realized I'd have to be crossing through Transylvania, and that just sounded scary. Bears and mountains and probably places with like no trails or no sort of culture of trail running. And also I heard about the feral dogs in Romania, and that worried me a little bit, packs of wild dogs roaming. So yeah, there were a lot of challenges, but I thought, well, it sounds like an incredible adventure. No one seems to have written about retracing that famous journey on foot. So why not? Sounds like you know, a fantastic experience.
I should say there are a lot of feral dogs in this book, more than I had anticipated when I started reading it. Gavin, I want to ask a question. So for me, as a non-ultra runner, in fact, a kind of very lazy runner, as it were, you know, it's such a long journey. What kind of mentality did you have to sort of get yourself into to kind of prepare for such kind of long stints of being on the road? What was your thought process when you were kind of thinking about addressing the day and also the length of that, and what keeps you going when you're kind of running these kind of miles? Often you're running through kind of beautiful countryside, but sometimes it's not quite as appealing as the kind of Carpathian mountain.
Yeah. I did at times have music to listen to, but to be honest, I used that resource very rarely. Just when things were absolutely, you know, flat out dull, like a very long road with nothing but trucks rumbling past. But I suppose it's kind of meditative for me. I don't know whether it's to do with alpha waves or whatever mental state you get into, but I actually quite like switching off from the daily grind and just letting the world pass me by. I'm putting effort in, but I find that my mind can roam sort of quite creatively, and I can sort of enjoy just seeing whatever there is around me. There's always something worth noticing. So I don't think I really get bored. Fatigue is the hardest thing to deal with, because the body just starts saying, "Oh, please stop, you know, in an increasingly whiny manner." So just regular breaks and, you know, some calories and something to drink, and just to remind myself of, you know, today might be a bad day, but tomorrow's likely to be better. There's always something, and there's always something to look forward to. Either I was going to hit an incredible city like Bucharest or Budapest even, or I was going to end up at the Black Sea and be able to go swimming, or just have a lovely meal with Aradhna in the van at the end of the day. So there was always something to look forward to, and always something to sort of mark the progress that we were making.
Aradhna, I want to come to you because, you know, you were helping Gavin in kind of being a cheerleader as he sort of was dealing with this fatigue that he's spoken about, and also you were womaning, as it were, Roxy, really sort of like the third character in this book. I have so many questions about van life. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your role as a kind of supporter and cheerleader in chief, as it were, and in terms of kind of van living, were there kind of weird things that you hadn't had to think about until you were living in a van, and would you like to share some of those with the rest of us?
Yeah, I should tell you, I've always hated camping. I mean, I just wasn't such a city girl, and the idea of suddenly, you know, telling all my friends that I was going to go off and live in a van and travel across Europe, it was surreal. But the thing is, I mean, it's quite tough living in a van. It's tiny. I mean, it's the size of an 8-seater car. It is an 8-seater car, and we ripped out all the seats and learned how to build cabinets via YouTube, and so that's tough. But at the same time, you don't actually need that much with you every day, and everything you do need, you've got, because it's in the van. I mean, it's your home. So I really enjoyed it. I think it's fair to say that the biggest challenge to get used to was, so it is a home. It had a kitchen and bed, you know, you can move it. It does not have a bathroom. Our bathroom was a bucket, a sponge, a trowel, and some loo roll. we had this sort of pop-up tent that for a bit of privacy if you needed it. But you know what? It's strange. You get used to it. It just becomes part of the routine. And there are things that I really enjoyed doing. I loved cooking in the van. That for me made it home. Being able to cook proper meals. I had my favourite thing in the van was a little spice box. So this is, I think it's a kid's toy box that we picked up in B&Q, and it has these little sealable boxes. And my mum, before we went, she filled each one with the different Indian spices that, you know, like what the first time I went to university, and she did a little spice box and it was like that. And it was my little piece of home. I could make anything that I make at home in the van. In fact, I made things I'd never made at home. And so in terms of the challenges, I mean, Gavin was off running all day. I was very much by myself with the van, and Roxy, our camper van, was like the third person. I spent more time with Roxy than with Gavin. And the duties that you have, I mean, keeping Roxy running and fueled, and navigating roads, keeping Gavin safe, you know, fueled, finding foods that I try and anticipate that he will eat because he needs to, tending to him when he gets injured, picking him up when he suddenly rings and says, you need to just come and get me now, where are you? Not really sure, figure it out. You know, I think those sort of support duties, that I'd never done anything like that, as well as having never lived in a van and never liked camping. So there was a lot of firsts, and for me, just kind of figuring it out as I went along and just trying to react and respond to what Gavin was asking for, what Roxy was asking for. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. What strikes me as well in the book is you come across the kind of hospitality of the people that you met in Europe, and kind of how did that, it's a question for both of you, but I'll come to Gavin first, is how did that sort of shape your ideas or kind of identity as kind of being a European, because given the time that you were doing this journey and what has sort of happened subsequently, I'd be really interested to hear how this experience of kind of traveling across Europe really sort of kind of shaped your ideas of kind of the continent. Gavin, coming to you first with that.
Yeah, well, from a geographical perspective, it was very interesting when we got to Alsace, because the border between France and Germany there seems quite fluid and historically has moved around a lot. So you're still in France, in Strasbourg, but all the houses start looking very Germanic, and the food becomes quite Germanic. And on the signs, the place names are sort of German place names, but everyone's speaking French, and it's still very much a sort of French culture. So that was interesting. There were very few hard borders until we got to the age of the Schengen area, where it was people were just incredibly supportive and friendly. I'm sure Aradhna has some fantastic stories herself of meeting people that helped her out, but for me, the one that stands out is we met a little family called the Sonnleitners in Austria, in this farming region. We'd actually tried to find somewhere for the night, and we were having a lot of trouble away from one thing. So we drove up these hills, and then the road seemed to suggest that it was private. Oh God, big sites in private. We're going to have to turn back somehow. And then Aradhna spotted my side of this young woman who seemed to be like planting carrots or something. So, she popped out of the van, and our friend David was over to visit, and I said to him, you know, she's going to come back in about 10 minutes time with a place for us to stay and probably a meal or something. And that indeed happened. And they were incredibly, that family, I think there were 7 kids and 2 parents. They weren't all there at the same time, but they were so hospitable. They let us park there. They invited us to a campfire, and we sort of roasted homemade bread, like dough on sticks, which I'd never seen before. And the mother, Maria, who was the same name as the daughter actually, sang John Denver songs on her guitar. And then the next morning we went round for breakfast, and we brought some of our food, and we had this lovely meal with homemade yogurt and muesli and stuff that was created by the family from, you know, stuff they made on the farm. So it was really lovely just to meet those kind of people who really had no reason to support us, except they felt like kinship, you know. And I think that's for us what Europe is about. Is, yeah, we all speak different languages. We've got different. Some of us may have been at war with another in the past, but we get over it, you know. And we forge a very powerful cultural and economic bloc. And I just think, you know, without getting too political, I think it's just a great shame that we've turned our backs on it. And I hope that, you know, one day we'll return. But regardless, we are Europeans, whether we like it or not.
Aradhna, the kind of same question to you now. Kind of, how did the experience shape your thinking about Europe?
Kind of a lot of similar things in terms of just, you know, such kindness, generosity, people. I think it's fair to say along the whole way, we were treated with kindness and hospitality. I can't immediately think of any bad experiences, actually. I was a bit worried about it. I mean, you know, we were essentially travellers, you know, living in a van, kind of encroaching on people's land, probably doing things wrong a lot of the time. So that was just lovely for general humanity. The thing about Europe that I was really interested to explore and was delighted to find was kind of the interesting and weird ways that it changes as you travel from west to east, and kind of noting the similarities as well as the differences. The one constant was just kindness that we received everywhere. I mean, I hate to keep banging on about it, but there were no barriers or boundaries when it came to that. Gavin's just talked about this amazing friendly experience we had meeting Sunlight family, and we had pretty much the exact same experience. That was in Austria, and then in Turkey we met Haku, who became a really good friend of Gavin's. Kind of insisted on bringing us to his family, invited us round for a dinner, amazing dinner that his mum and his wife had cooked, and insisted that we stay with them, opened up his home in Istanbul and insisted that we spend the night in his home. And this was a guy who he saw us camping on the side of the road and kind of came over to inquire after the UK licence plate and said, oh, well, I spent 3 amazing years studying in the UK. Like, it was amazing. Now you're in my country. Like, let me do something nice for you. And it was just really friendly, and it just reminds you how much more we have in common, whilst also honestly seeing how different things are as you travel. I mean, experiencing the roads and kind of horse and carts in Romania, feral dogs, landscapes, compared to, you know, kind of the autobahns in Germany. A lot of that is really different. Navigating different currencies, different food. That was really, really interesting. And then kind of similarly on the way back, I mean, that was after the end of Gavin's run, but we took a different route back. And again, a lot of the countries we went through weren't EU, but are still part of Europe. And it made me feel like, wow, it's so different, but this is all part of my Europe in a way.
Thank you both. Before we come to kind of, we're going to have another reading from Gavin shortly. But I would love to know, you travelled through 8 countries. Were there any kind of particular highlights in terms of the landscape? Anything that surprised you about a country that you perhaps didn't have any expectations, but kind of you really, really warmed to? Gavin, I'm going to ask you that first. So, question for you: any favourites, or is it too difficult?
Oh, well, there were highlights in every country, but for me, although it was emotional in a negative sense from time to time, Romania was an incredible place. Romania has no infrastructure for runners. I didn't pass, I think once in Bucharest I saw a runner, but I literally saw no one else running or cycling in Romania. And it's a country of huge contrast. There's quite wealthy cities like Bucharest and Arad we passed through. But I think there's a runner I wanted to go to a place where it sounded like it started with letters for a name. But yeah, and then you just go a few, maybe 20 miles outside of Arad, and you're in a village that could be from England, and you know, not quite medieval times, but in the 19th century, there was chickens and geese and cows wandering the streets, and tumble down shacks and hay ricks and old wells and beautiful churches with like painted frescoes around them, and then sort of silvery. And but at the same time, it had these weird things like these huge packs of feral dogs. Because without going into the whole history of it, which I go into in the book a bit, Ceausescu had this in the 80s. He had this program of resettlement where he kind of forcibly made villagers from small villages move to the cities, but they weren't allowed to take their animals, so they had to abandon these domestic animals, and they just let them. They just went and bred in the wild and sort of regressed to the pack animals that they are. I mean, they're basically wolves. So I'd run across a hillside, very, you know, hardly a trail at all. And then out of the trees come this huge pack of about 7 or 8 dogs. You know, the big Alsatians, possibly a Rottweiler, a couple of terriers, and a complete mix of dogs. But they have, you know, an alpha dog that would just, you know, at the front barking furiously at you. And I just had to carry a stick or pick up a handful of stones and kind of wave it at them and shout and try and be dominant. I never got attacked, but I felt that sometimes that it could be quite dangerous. But I just kind of got used to it after a while. But literally one day I was attacked by, I think, 12 different packs of dogs or individual dogs. They really have a major problem with that. But culturally, in terms of how people were, the beautiful scenery of the Carpathian Mountains, which my father came over to visit for a while, for 2 weeks while Aradhna was looking after her gran back home. And we went over the Carpathians over this road called the 67C, the Transalpino. It's just staggering. So I would say, without like waxing on a great length, Romania was a highlight for me. It was difficult. I felt very tense at times. It wasn't the most scared I've felt, but it was certainly unforgettable, and I'd love to go back.
Aradhna, what about you? Was there a country that won your heart, that kind of you hadn't anticipated kind of would kind of worm itself into your affections?
To be honest, I'd have to agree. I think Romania, probably just because I knew so little about it. It was so unexpected, surprising. There was so much to explore. It was so changing. And also, I guess personally, I missed out on 2 weeks of the Romanian adventure, particularly the beautiful bit through the Carpathians. So I guess I'm left with a bit of a hankering to go back and experience that again. And I think also, just in terms of our journey, by the time we got to Romania, we'd been on the road a couple of months, I guess, and we'd just we'd found our groove, we'd found a routine. It's not exactly that it became easier, but it became more second nature. You just knew what had to be done. I was used to kind of figuring out new foods and things like that by then. You know, I'd already spent quite a lot of time through Hungary, where the language was completely unrecognisable. In a way, going to Romania, I thought at least I can sort of try and make some sense of some of the words here. It's, you know, a bit more familiar. I think one particular night that really stands out for me was actually in Austria, and it was a circumstance thing. We were camped in a relatively uninspiring kind of an overspill car park. There was a ski lift nearby. But Gavin and I had this really lovely experience together, which was the sort of thing that I thought we would be doing. You know, I think I hadn't appreciated to begin with how much of our journeys would be our own journeys by ourselves. So in Austria, we'd run out of gas, no idea where to get gas from. I think it was a Sunday as well, and so without gas we can't cook. And we were in this car park, and Gavin had this genius idea to make a little bonfire. It was really dry. There was lots of stones. He could do it in a way that was safe. I didn't even know that Gavin had it in him, and he managed to light this fire first time. And we had our camping chairs out, and I had it was a rosé, I think it was a local one. And we baked potatoes on the campfire and got the kettle out and managed to boil the kettle on the fire, and just had this, albeit quite simple yet filling meal, just kind of completely reliant on each other and Roxy, and I don't even know where we were, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And that's something that stuck with me as not something I ever thought that I'd be doing, and something that we achieved together.
Oh, thank you. We're now going to come to a reading from Gavin, and before I'm going to ask Gavin to introduce it, just to say that to people watching at home, as it were, we're going to come to some questions after this reading. So do send in your questions, and we'll get to as many as possible. So now I'd like to ask Gavin to introduce what we're going to hear next.
Yeah, this is from quite near the end of the journey. It's in Turkey, and it's basically a very short chapter where I take a bit of a wrong turning in the wilderness on the day of the presidential election in 2018. So yeah, enjoy. I round the rocky hillside, still confused by the sight of what seemed to be a military lookout tower, and wondering if it was sensible to step over the fallen gate I passed a mile or so back. As the evening light dims towards sunset, a white booth appears below me, two young men in military uniforms standing nearby. They're facing away from me, smoking, and apparently blithely unaware of my approach. Given their shoulder-slung rifles, I realise I'd better announce myself. I clear my throat. They turn, immediately alarmed and grabbing at their weapons. It is only then that I realise I'm trespassing on a military base on the day of Turkey's presidential elections. This might not end well. To understand my fears, we have to rewind to the beginning of that remarkable day when, leaving Balaban, I am reminded of the political situation in Turkey by the visage of the current president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, printed on a sheet and proudly displayed from a well-to-do home on the outskirts of town. Today the country is due to hold its presidential and parliamentary elections, and the incumbent president is the favourite to become head of both state and government, a situation some fear will bring about a communist-style rule by diktat, something the country's northern neighbours know too well. This democratic election could paradoxically engender a situation where one man holds total sway over his electorate. Erdogan brought the election date forward from summer 2019 in order, critics feel, to prevent his opposition from mounting an effective campaign. It's fair to say that Europe is closely observing its only majority Muslim candidate member to see whether a Western-style democracy can be maintained amidst rumours of vote stuffing and other manipulation. Ignorant as I am of the true situation as I run through the villages on 26th of June, I know only that an election is happening soon. I think little of it and run on. The road out of town constructed of reddish gravel and so quiet that Aradhna is able to drive alongside me as I run. It makes a nice change to have her company, and only once does she have to pull in behind me to allow a logging truck to sidle by. The weather is warm and humid, the road undulating up into the hills. Aradhna even films a shot of me ambling along, moving at a decent, if unheroic, pace. The trail takes me along dusty lanes lit by evening light and a sentinel moon, 3/4 full. It glows pale blue in a bluer sky overhead. I see nobody but a few forestry workers having a cigarette break amongst the young plantation all around. Surprisingly, I spot oak and maple trees amongst the young saplings. Destined for furniture, I suppose. It looks like we will find plenty of good wild camping spots, since there are many side paths and the tracks of vehicles amongst the reddish dust. I text Aradhna to ask her to find me somewhere on my current route, imagining Roxy hoving into sight over one of the small rises. I'm beginning to feel extremely fatigued, and the sun is skimming the horizon. I really don't want to get stuck running through this place under moonlight alone, and of course I haven't packed my head torch. Aradhna texts to warn me that she's encountered a large military base covering much of the land north of our intended stopping point, the town of Vies. I reason that signposts or fences would suffice to repel intruders. As long as I steer clear of anything obviously military, I'll be fine. Inevitably, this is a naive assumption. The rocky hilltop and surrounding moorland is frequented by small skittish deer which bound away at my approach. These animals distract me from further clues to where I am heading, including spent bullet cartridges and curls of barbed wire. There are a couple of warning signs on the plantation side of the hill, in Turkish, which I guess have something to do with trespassing in the forest. I even hop over a fallen fence, the gate lying useless amongst the dust, assuming that if there were anything worth protecting beyond it, the fence would be properly maintained. It's only when I encounter the two young armed sentries that I realise I have made a full set of false assumptions. As the frankly teenage soldiers grab at their guns, I begin to garble an explanation. I just ran over the hill. There were no signs. I'm running to Istanbul. The young men paused to process my words, clearly unsure how to handle me. Running? Yes, to Istanbul. I'm sorry, I must have taken a wrong turning. Their expressions reveal this is something of an understatement. One sentry begins to gabble into a walkie-talkie as they lead me down the hillside, guns in hand. On the way down, a large all-terrain truck rumbles up to meet us, and I'm instructed to climb in. I sit beside a young officer, let's call him a sergeant, who speaks better English than the younger privates, possibly doing national service, who accosted me. Once I explain what I'm doing, he tells me with pride that he runs 10k every day. I congratulate him, thinking that any opportunity for bonding might stand me in good stead when it comes to negotiating my release from a Turkish prison. As we approach a group of blocky buildings and an imposing, well-guarded fence and gateway, it becomes clear that I'm within the same military base Aradhna warned me about earlier. I jump down from the truck and am led into one of the buildings, into a small office and ordered to sit in front of a desk, behind which sits a smiling 40-something officer, probably a grade higher than my fellow runner, let's call him the captain. He wears a non-committal and serious expression with a hint of a smile. ID, asks the captain. I shake my head ruefully, indicating my running apparel. Then I remember that I have the Turkish e-visa on my phone. I ask permission to look through my iPhone, and the captain nods. I find the visa and pass the phone over. The captain studies it and then calls his superior. I'm imagining a colonel seated somewhere comfortable. The conversation takes place over a mobile phone plugged into some mysterious white box, presumably to scramble the signal. I then hear a word from the sergeant that I think I recognise, but can't be sure. Chai? They can't really be offering me tea, can they? I decide to assume that they are. Sure, I nod vociferously. Thanks. A few moments later, while the captain is still considering what to do with me, a glass of hot black tea appears, tasty and refreshing. I immediately relax, as any British person would. If they're offering me tea, surely they can't have any evil intentions. Then my fellow runner passes me his phone. He's used Google Translate to render a phrase into English. It will be okay. Once more I relax. I type my own phrase, asking permission to tell Aradhna where I am. The officers nod agreement, and I have the following exchange with my girlfriend. I'm with some soldiers. They're being nice to me, but I may be a while. I turn my attention back to the captain and don't see Aradhna's reply. Ah, are you being escorted? Are you okay? Meanwhile, I decline a second cup of tea after the captain finishes his and requests more. The sergeant shows me another message, generated on his phone. Erdogan won! He laughs heartily. In that moment, I remember that the election is being held today and that there might be some controversy over the fairness of the result. Is this officer pro-Erdogan? Is he being ironic, suggesting that the result is far from a surprise? I tried to hedge my bets with my response, offering a small laugh and then a half shrug as if to say, of course he did. Who knows what political allegiances these men have? I've seen the film Midnight Express many years ago and want more than anything to avoid ending up in a Turkish prison. The captain hangs up from his lengthy chat with the putative colonel. He nods and says something to his sergeant, who turns to me. You can go. Immense relief floods me. I ask if I can phone Aradhna for a pickup, and they agree, highly amused, as they lead me out of the fortified entrance, as Roxy draws up and Aradhna jumps out wide-eyed. I bid a fond farewell to the running sergeant and his sentries. I climb into Roxy and feel just a little on edge as Aradhna backs the van out of the narrow concrete channel in which she'd been directed to park. We drive swiftly away from the scene of my trespass, past glimpses of street parties and other festivals. Erdogan's supporters are highly visible in V's, at least, and are celebrating democracy, dealing them a winning hand. I am just glad not to be squatting in a dark hole somewhere, begging for my freedom. Freedom is something seldom appreciated until it is threatened.
Thank you so much for that reading, Gavin. Before we crack on with the questions, I want to apologise if anyone's been having any trouble with the sound. Sadly, in this sort of digital age which we find ourselves in, sometimes the internet cannot be as reliable as we would like. So apologies to anyone who's had some audio problems. So we've got a few questions here. Thank you to everyone who's submitted a question so far. So the first question comes from Jen Manley, and her question is, what was the strangest thing that you ran past? I suppose that one is for Gavin, and a sort of companion question would be, Aradhna, what was the strangest thing you drove past?
I'm not sure well, yeah, two things on the same day in Bulgaria. The first thing was I was following a road that Google Maps assured me was there, which is a foolish thing to assume when you're running in somewhere like Bulgaria. It used to be a road about 60 or 70 years ago, but now it basically returned to forest. And so I'm running along this thing that you can basically see has got tarmac somewhere, but lots of weeds going through it and trees and everything. And then suddenly there's a massive bite out of it, about 10 feet deep and about 20 feet wide. So I have to sort of climb down and then clamber back up on the other bit of the road. That was quite like a sort of post-apocalyptic environment. And then slightly later on, once I managed to find my way back to something that resembled a path, I just heard this like deep snorting sound and looked to my left, and there were this seven or eight, I don't know, gigantic black boars on a path fortunately parallel to mine. And they were huge. Each one's the size of a small cow or something. And they were sort of, fortunately, they were kind of galloping away from me. I'm going that way, they're going that way, and they didn't bother me. But yeah, I hadn't even thought about wild boars as being a thing. But yeah, we were in the Stranja region between Bulgaria and Turkey, and yeah, wild boars are quite common there. So yeah, that was my highlight of that day.
For me, I think the weirdest thing was just some of the, again, like thanks SatNav/Google Maps. There's just some of the weirdest places that I decided were roads and drove through. So I think I drove through quite a lot of people's fields. Sorry. It was marked as a road on my map, and I just thought I kind of in for a penny and for a pound. And just, especially in the beginning in France, just praying that I didn't get stuck in the field, because, you know, they were quite waterlogged and muddy, and Roxy is not a 4x4. The worst one, though, was in Bulgaria, not far from where Gavin had the encounter with the wild boars. I took a road that I thought was different to his. That was marked the road was actually a forestry logging path, so only designed for like those massive lorries with the huge wheels. And it was the scariest thing in the world. I just thought, you know, if Roxy falls into one of them, that she's done. We're not getting out. I'm done. We're in the middle of a forest somewhere in Bulgaria, and again, there was no way I could sort of try and turn back. It was, you just had to keep going, which was utterly terrifying. And just thinking, I didn't even have very good reception either. I really thought that I was just gonna, Roxy and I'm gonna die in one of those chasms in the road. So I think probably that's what stands out the most. And then some of the weird huge insects in Bulgaria. Yeah, like they were kind of like three times the size of a bumblebee, and they had like big green eyes. And the worst navigation in the world, you could hear them because they kept flying into the van, and it was like the sound of someone throwing pebbles at the van, and it's these giant flying insects.
Green eyes.
So moving away from flying insects, which sound bizarre and slightly terrifying to me, I've got a question from Brian M, who has said, did you have visas for each of the countries you visited, and did you have loads of different currency? I'm going to come to Aradhna on that one, because it was the queen of logistics, I get from the book.
Yeah, absolutely. That was very much my domain. So this is going to sound remarkably naive. But in the first instance, we just didn't really think about it. We thought Europe, euros, off we go, done, bank card, fine. EU, we're still part of the EU, clutching British passport, really easy. No borders between the countries, France, Germany, Austria, Hungary. And then it was when we got to Hungary that for the first time I went to go and do some shopping. I think I was just I was wandering around a town called Győr. I had a couple of rare hours where Gavin was off doing his thing, and I thought, I can actually go and explore somewhere and be a tourist. I just went to go and buy an ice cream. I thought, oh God, they don't have the euro here. I genuinely no idea what the currency is. Didn't get that far in my planning. But you know what, it's really easy to travel. I just went to an ATM and used my normal bank card and got out a whole load of money and sort of a quick Google. But that was the best thing. My phone worked with its full data allowance the whole way, which is invaluable. And that's thanks to the EU rules on data and phone contracts. So just a quick Google to figure out the currency rate, and got out a stack of them. But then again, when I was in the shop, you could just pay by card, and it was just no problem. I had a credit card, which was, sorry to be a bit boring and logistical, but it was 0% fees on international purchases. So that was the one sensible thing I did. And then we didn't need any visas in advance, because all the way up to Bulgaria, again, it's all EU. The thing that we did have is when we hit the Hungary-Romania border, again, naively, just sort of forgot that, because we thought it's all EU, we forgot that there's this Schengen visa area, and that Hungary is the edge of it. And so you have to actually go to a checkpoint and go through. So you had to have things like your car insurance, your driver's license, and your passport, but you don't need visas. I'd also checked that our car insurance was valid all the way through to Turkey, which it was. The only thing in Turkey was that we had to buy. Oh, sorry, my breakdown was the insurance wasn't. So when you get to Turkey, we had to buy something called a green card, which is basically car insurance that covers you for a couple of weeks or a month, up to a month. And you, for Turkey, buy a visa on entry. So it's remarkably easy. I would say, this wasn't really part of the book, but on the way back, going through the Balkans, again, it's quite easy. You just do things at the border. I really, you asked this question earlier about our thoughts on Europe. We are so lucky to have a British passport. I mean, you just float through, you wave it around, and people just don't ask questions, and you go through, and there's systems to buy visas at entry points. No one really questions you, even if you're a bit weird looking in a van and a guy running alongside the van, because it wouldn't let him have a lift because that would be cheating. They give you a funny look, but they'd laugh and say, "Oh, you Brits," and wave you through.
Oh, thank you. We've only got kind of about 5 minutes left, and we've got 3 more questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read all 3 questions to the 2 of you, and you can answer them as briefly or as long as you would like. There's a question from Hannah, which says, did any locals try to crack a joke that was hilarious in their culture but just went over your heads as Brits? The other question, just scrolling down, is from Edra, which was, what kept you going on really terrible days? And the last question, which is a question after my own heart really, is from Vaska, which was, what was the best food you ate and where? Gavin, I'll let you choose which kind of how you want to answer those questions, and then we'll come to Aradhna. Oh, have we lost Gavin?
It seems to have frozen.
Aradhna, do you want to sort of crack on with those questions, and hope Gavin will be back and joining us, and perhaps just with his audio. So Aradhna, do you want to start?
Absolutely, question after my own heart. Can I dive in with food?
Yeah, of course.
So actually, we were on a bit of a tight budget and often in the middle of nowhere. So I mostly cooked as we travelled along, and my favourite cooking experience was being able to cook outdoors when the weather picked up. It's just lovely, in a field somewhere. I would say probably the number one thing that both of us, I think, appreciated the most was pizza, because it's the only thing that you can't make in the van. It sounds so boring. And the best, one of the most memorable meals, I think, was in Hungary by the side of Lake Tartar. And Gavin had something called a Castle Defender's roast.
Yep.
So you can't beat that.
Gavin, over to you. Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, because I was in the technological nightmares land.
So the questions were, did any locals try and crack a joke that was hilarious, sort of in their culture, but went over your head as a Scot? What kept you going on the really terrible days? And the one that Aradhna's just sort of answered was, what was the best food that you ate and where?
In terms of jokes, I honestly don't know, because I probably didn't understand what on earth they were saying. I remember there was, in Romania, again, a lot of strange things happened in Romania. There was an old guy sort of mimed an umbrella at me and laughed. And I just went, and I'm wearing t-shirt and shorts and everything. And I think he knew something about the local weather more than I did, because literally about 2 minutes later, a massive downpour started and I got completely drenched. So if I'd been able to understand what you were saying in Romanian, I might have, been prepared for that. But and I think, and the second question, what kept me going? Sheer bloody mindedness is kind of one of my strong suits, or Aradhna might say one of my failings. Like, it's both sometimes. But I think it's just, you just get into a state of mind where you're achieving something. You have to keep reminding yourself what you're actually doing. We are doing this incredible thing. We're having this adventure. We're crossing 8 countries. We're
Oh, sorry everyone. I think we kind of lost Gavin into a technical black hole, for which I'm really sorry about. And I'm really sad to say we've kind of come to the end of our time. Gavin, do you want to quickly repeat what you just said, or shall I encourage everyone to go forth and buy the book? What would you like to do?
I think the latter. Running the Orient. It's available in all good bookshops. And I believe you can get a signed copy. We're probably going to elucidate how.
Yes. So, firstly, do go forth and buy this book. In fact, I would recommend running to your local bookshop. That seems very apt. Or, in fact, you can buy a signed copy from the very wonderful Daunt's bookshop. And the book looks like this, if you have forgotten what it looks like. And that is just from dauntbooks.co.uk/shop/books/running the Orient, but there will be a link kind of appearing on the page now. For those of you who are a bit nerdy, a bit like me, and you want to see more images and maps, you can follow the blog that Gavin and Aradhna did. And there's also a Facebook page called Running the Orient. I should say, caveat that the blog only runs up to Hungary, because I'm told that it just got a bit much with everything else which was going on, which I think is pretty fair in the circumstances. I love this book. I felt like I was running along with Gavin and having my own adventure as well. But I was quite lucky that my legs were not doing it. But kind of warning that it may inspire you to think about your own adventure and where you might want to go next, especially as we're all sort of kind of tucked up at home at the moment. I want to thank you, the audience, for joining us. A huge thank you to Gavin and Aradhna for sharing just a small glimpse of this book. So please do go and buy it and read more about this really, really extraordinary adventure that they had. And kind of the last thing I would like to say is, if you're all at home and you've got a glass, I hope you all kind of can raise your glass and say cheers to Gavin, and huge thanks to Aradhna for joining us this evening. So cheers and thank you to Gavin on the launch of your book.
And thanks to you for joining us. It was lovely.